Well, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Tokyo Table Talks. Our weekly unscripted podcast where we talk about Dungeons & Dragons, things Dungeons & Dragons adjacent. We talk about tabletop games and other nerddom in general. My name is Vincent. I play Atlas Lucky Lectern of the Feathered Hats, and I am joined today at our table by...
DM Mike. I am back again. Missed you guys last week, but here we are to talk about another episode.
So, Mike, let's talk about some game systems that we've both played. Obviously, we've played a lot of Dungeons & Dragons.
A whole lot of D&D.
Oh, yeah. All the 2nd edition, all the way up to 5th.
Second up, right. I don't really have too much experience in 4th, but definitely 2, 3, 3, 5. You played a Pathfinder.
Oh, definitely. 3, 7, 5, as
3, 7, 5, right.
And
then
5th. 5, yeah. What are some other game systems that you've played through?
I've played through some 40K, to be more specific. Touched a little bit on Rogue Trader and did some Dark Heresy. Also did my run through White Wolf a few times.
I think everyone's been through White Wolf.
I think we've had those weekends where you wake up and you wake up on Monday morning and you look back at the weekend, not remembering too much, and that's White Wolf in a nutshell.
you find in your bathroom it's like your pants, your cell phone, and like a discarded Mage the Awakening character sheet. So of course everyone's gone through their White Wolf phase as well. I myself have played through Call of Cthulhu. I've done a lot of Shadowrun, which is kind of my home system, or at least it used to be until we got to our 5th edition campaign. There are a lot of different games, and there's a lot of things that make each of those systems unique.
Right.
But then, sometimes the unique bits...
Sometimes there's that page, there's that character description, there's that skill that no matter how many times you read over to try to implement it, it just rubs you the wrong way. It just doesn't feel right, doesn't work.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that people try to do to make their games unique, which often works, but not necessarily always in a good way.
And sometimes they'll be those minor annoyances where you'll sit down with your GM, DM, and they'll just say, okay, this spell, this item, it's off the table. Moving on, done. Sometimes there are core mechanics that severely hurt the system and the enjoyment you get out of playing that system.
So why don't we talk about a couple of those today, and we'll see what you, the audience, also think. So let's start with a system that is near and dear to our hearts. Let's start with Dungeons & Dragons. I am a firm proponent of building a character that has clear motivations. I think that having a character that doesn't have motivations is just as good as not having a character at all at the table. And I know a lot of people talk about the alignment system in Dungeons & Dragons like it's a bad thing. But what do you think about it, Mike?
Well, I think alignment is a guideline. And I think how it's sold in especially some of the older editions where certain classes, certain abilities are locked down to alignments, it really pigeonholes you into the... Pigeonholes? Really pigeonholes you into that role that I am chaotic, or I am lawful good, I need to be the upstanding, the judge, I need to be only good, and that is the end of the road. And that's not motivation. You can't grow a character from that. You certainly can't do it organically. It's a set rule that is telling you how to play your own creation.
And I agree that there is some level of restrictiveness of the alignment system, but I am sort of the opinion that the alignment chart, as it were, that 3x3 chart that tells you which direction your loyalties lie, is actually more of a help than it is a hinder. Think of it like the actor's notes for a character that you have to play in a stage production. Surely you know that character exists, and it isn't you, but you not only have to play that character to a faithfulness, but you also have to embody that character in a way that is specific to you as well. I think having the alignment chart tells you, this is what this character should think, and I can make choices, whether they be bold or not, that follow or deviate from that chart.
Right.
Think about playing an old school paladin. Back in the day, if you were not a lawful good paladin, you weren't a paladin.
You didn't even get your abilities and spells.
You
as
had
soon,
to.
Yeah, as soon as you did anything that wasn't lawful good, you faced being an ex-paladin.
Yep, you could either go blackguard or had to just be a normal fighter for a while.
And that was the thing, was you didn't even have the abilities of a fighter. You were an ex-paladin. You were less than a fighter at that point.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was, I need to subscribe to these rule sets that were very heavy-handedly given to me, or be basically useless.
Mm-hmm. And that is definitely a restriction on the kind of choices that your character can make.
Mm-hmm.
However, looking forward now to where we are at 5th edition, I'm not sure if I agree with the fact that paladins can be whatever alignment they want, and that if they deviate from their alignment, they don't lose their things or whatever, but that is how that system works now.
Mm-hmm.
Paladins were based off of the idea that, you know, it was a knight in shining armor. It was the Sir Bedivere. It was the Sir Galahad at your table. And they were very heavily based off of the mythology from Le Morte d'Arthur, where if you were a knight, you were definitely an upstanding, shining character, in the literature at least.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And that's what the paladin was supposed to be. So that it gave you this, you are a holy knight, you follow these sets of rules, actually harkens back to the origins of the character archetype to begin with, which I think was actually more helpful than not. Because if you wanted to play, you know, a sword-wielding, like, shield hide-behinding gentleman in armor who was knightly, you could just play a fighter with flavor. But if you really wanted to be that special holy knight, we had a thing for you.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, going on the opposite of the paladin, you are rolling a 5th edition character or a 3rd edition character, and you look at that chart, and you are playing an lawful evil rogue. And you look at that word evil, and you read the description for what a lawful evil character does, and you're with your party, and the poor old lady needs a silver, or needs help with the goblins that are attacking her crops. What does that word evil, what does that description tell you to do?
It's very true that the word evil has connotations to it from outside of the game that tell you, oh, well, I'm evil, I shouldn't give care about what the people around me do or whatever. But then you also have to look into what the lawful portion does as well. A lawful evil character follows rules, but does it to the benefit of themselves. Mm-hmm. They have a code that they follow, but it doesn't benefit others. It benefits them more than anyone else. So, if there is a way that you could contrive yourself gaining something out of clearing out the goblins for the lady, or something like that, then that would be a clearer character motivation. Mm-hmm. But just saying, oh, I'm evil, I don't care, maybe not lawful, that might be chaotic evil at that point. So I think there's a layer of adding those two axes together that people tend to just forget when they see the word evil or they see the word good.
Mm-hmm. And that's my whole gripe with the system, though, is they see those words, they see those strong words of law and law versus chaos, good versus evil, and I feel that is what the alignment system in D&D really pushes new players to do, is to grab onto those archetypes and be them.
And overplay them.
Right.
So you and I come to an agreement here when we both think that the perception of the alignment system is bad.
I believe so, yes. I think it's a necessary thing, that especially to build that character motivation. 5th edition is a great thing with that, though, with bonds and ideals and flaws to really help give your characters some flavor, some color. But the idea of the alignment system of this chart, that you need to pick one of these 9 choices, and that is your moral code, it just doesn't feel, it's not organic, especially with how players play and how things happen in the game. Just doesn't feel right. It doesn't sit right.
And that's fair. I think we can both agree that there is a restrictiveness to it that could be avoided with a system like, unfortunately, White Wolf's system, where they have a flaw and a virtue instead of an alignment. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And unfortunately, that's one point that I have to give towards White Wolf over Dungeons & Dragons.
So would you say right now, White Wolf is an objectively better system than Dungeons and Dragons.
If we look at I hate you. If we look at no other aspects than the way that you describe what your character's motivations are, then yes, White Wolf is objectively better than Dungeons and Dragons.
So you heard it here, folks. White Wolf is better than D&D, Vincent 2017.
I swear to God.
Moving on.
But so, actually talking about alignments, looking at the things that are evil and all that, you get the people that see that they can be evil and they run with it a little bit too far. And I think that might be a thing that you can just address with when you become more mature as a person, you know how to not be a dick to the people at your table.
Right.
But what if your system rewards you for that? What if your system has mechanics that expect you to just be a terrible person?
That almost sounds like a segue. Are you getting at something, or are those just random thoughts?
Man, are we getting good at this or what?
Right?
Let's talk about Fatal. I know that everyone who's ever played any role-playing game for more than 10 minutes has probably heard someone complain about this garbage fire of a system called Fatal. It stands for From Another Time, Another Land. And you can tell that it's bad news right off the bat if you look at the front cover of the rulebook. Because not only does it have some very stereotypically sexually suggestive imagery on it, but it also has the same kind of sticker that like a CD in the 90s.
The parental...
The black and white parental supervision required. What? Who thinks that it's a good idea to advertise that? Who thinks that it's a good idea to have a system that you purposefully act like a legitimately bad person and have that be a draw point for it? It's gotta be... there's gotta be a reason for it or something, right? So why do I dislike Fatal so much? Mike, what do you know about Fatal?
I know what I've read on boards. I know I've read a bit of a few pages here and there when I see some people post images of, oh, you got to read this rule. And more often than not, when it is completely bonkers, it's a page from Fatal.
Oh, it definitely is. Fatal is to tabletop role-playing games what, like, Dirty Dead skunk ass is to a nose. It is the absolute worst possible outcome of the words tabletop role-playing and game put together. Fatal rewards you for perpetrating terrible human rights violations to the characters in the game as though it was a normal thing.
Does it reward that when it's party on party? Like party member PvP?
The PvP can exist in Fatal, but it's not the big thing for it. Fatal's thing is, as a reward, like in Dungeons & Dragons, if you beat a dragon, your reward is probably this ton of gold.
Right, the treasure
the dragon kept,
the prestige, the
yeah, you get reputation,
titles, reputations,
you get prestige.
Right.
In Fatal, it would be all of that. And also you get to force yourself upon as many women as you can get your hands on because you beat the dragon. Why shouldn't you? That bit there, the why shouldn't you, is the reward there. There are extensive rules for the act of violating another human in a sexual manner. I hate using the word rape in general. But when rape is a treasure, when rape is a reward for something that you did in the game, there is problems with your system. And I think this doesn't just go for Fatal. This goes for any system that rewards the heinous acts that you can perpetrate on people. I understand that there's a measure of, like, escapism in tabletop role-playing games. But to say that, oh, well, I'll just rape someone in this game because I can't do it in real life is sociopathy. That is something that should not be built into the mechanics of a game that you sell for money.
Now, to play devil's advocate, we have things in the D&D world, such as the Book of Vile Darkness.
We do.
Which also has that same parental guidance sticker on it. And you can make entire campaigns based on depravity, based on human rights violations, and there are rules for that. What makes something like that different, if at all? It
isn't okay. If you want to do a thing that is that kind of gross, in my humble opinion, you need to do it alone. You can write your stories about it all you like. When you die, and we find all of your weird journals filled with human rights violations, porn, and that kind of stuff, we'll talk about how weird you were when you were dead. But you are sharing this experience with another person. And that is something that I don't think is okay. Because, especially if you're going into this and the other people aren't as down with it as you are, you're forcing that on them, and that's gross.
I think that's going to be up to the group, especially if you're sitting down and your GM puts down the Fatal Handbook on the table. You got to know what you're getting into.
Yeah, if you have agreed to play Fatal, I'm not in your group. You have to know what you're getting into for it. And that's the same as like going over to your friend's house and then sitting down and being like, we're going to watch a snuff film today.
Right.
If you continue to sit through it, it is on you.
It's on you. You got to know if that is what your group is into. If you're into that kind of thing, I don't see any reason a product like that honestly shouldn't exist for those that seek it out. But I think if that is something that is brought into a game, so for example, our Feather Hats campaign, if we start introducing some fatal rules into that, that's something that we didn't talk about ahead of time. We didn't agree. This is not that kind of a game.
I will grant it to you. I suppose knowing that you're going into a system like this one proves to me that maybe it's not the system that is bad, but it's the people who made the system. The mechanic that bothers me the most about Fatal and other games like it that reward that thing is that it goes into such detail about how to perpetrate those acts. There is like a specific skill check for inserting an object into another human's body that isn't a knife for the purposes of cutting arteries to kill them. That's weird. It's kind of squick for me. This is an afternote from while I was editing this episode of the podcast, but I went back and did some more research on the Book of Vile Darkness that Mike was talking about, and it doesn't really have the same kind of reward systems for perpetrating such terrible acts on people. It in fact just emphasizes a lot of the things that they consider to be evil, but which are actually just chaotic. Instead, much like the Book of Exalted Deeds in that same line, talks about how things are good when they are actually just extremely and stupidly lawful. So really, the Book of Vile Deeds isn't even a tenth as bad as just the normal book for Fatal.
So, let's talk about something that...
maybe a little lighter of a topic.
Something that I actually think is okay. Nice segue.
Hey, segues! Good, yes.
Having your character built for you.
Okay, give me an example.
So you sit down and you have a blank character sheet in front of you.
Sure.
You have 2d10 and you roll those multiple times. Those are going to tell you your race, your class, your age, your height, how old you are.
Okay. What about that character that you just made is now personifiable?
It's more the idea. It's something that you need to work into. And this is coming from an older idea. My first character was a AD&D character.
Of course.
And that's what you did.
Well, in AD&D, you want to run us through as quick as you can, how a character gets made in AD&D?
As quick as I can. When I did it, it was 3d6, I believe, 3d6 in order, and that is what you got. So you roll your abilities, 3d6, you write down, that's your number, and then now you have these abilities.
Your strength. The second one is your dexterity.
Right. And now you have these abilities, now you can choose a class that you can actually play. So for example, I rolled and I got a 8 on my intelligence. I really wanted to play a wizard. But the minimum intelligence to play wizard is 12, so I cannot play a wizard.
Wizard is out at that point.
Can't do it. And looking at the classes that are available to me, I have fighter, and I guess I could maybe play a fighter. And now I take my 2, so now I am a fighter. That's all I know. I take 2d10, I roll, I am 42, and I roll some other dice, I am a human, and you build your character through dice. And I think that is a challenge on the RPer, on the player, that now I have this character, given to me, and I do kind of feel a connection to it because the dice gave it to me. And I think it's just a different mindset. And going into it, and especially in the older AD&D days, I did not expect that fighter to make it to 3rd level. If you made it to 2nd level, you were doing pretty good. If you made it to 3rd level,
AD&D.
Right. Characters did not last very long.
Well, of course. A game that has a very similar system to it right now is Burning Wheel. It has tables upon tables upon tables of backgrounds for your character, things that happened in your character's life. This is the table for what you roll when you were a child. Did you have a traumatic event? Were your parents dead? I don't know. This table will tell you. This is the thing that tells you what jobs you had. This is the thing that tells you this, that, and the other about your character that are things that you don't put forward from your own creativity. I like to liken these kind of systems to the difference between a Western RPG and a JRPG. When you go into playing Final Fantasy VII, you go in as Cloud, the ex-soldier member who is now a mercenary who is working for the Avalanche Gang. Okay, good. Now you know the information about who you are.
Right.
Whereas, if you go into Skyrim, for instance, you choose your race, your height, how tall you are, whether you're a male or a female, whether or not you have magic. So you get to build your character from the ground up.
Right.
And that character now has your name if you've put it in there. So it's the difference between Cloud Strife, the sword-wielding ex-soldier, and Mr. Poopy Butthole, the dragonkin sorcerer with orange hair.
Right. That may or may not have a Keyblade if you're using PC.
Oh my god. The mods on that game, man.
That's a whole nother.
We'll talk about that one another time, maybe. But I think that's where the difference really comes in. A game like Burning Wheel, a game like AD&D, puts you into the role of an existing character. And you have to play that character until it dies or you win, however your win condition is. When you boot up Final Fantasy VII, you know exactly who you're going to play as. But for a game like, for instance, Shadowrun or Call of Cthulhu, where you build your character from a blank page, the dice don't decide much for you. Especially in Shadowrun, you don't roll dice to get your stats. You build your stats with a point-buy system. So you get to choose what your character is good at. You get to choose what your character isn't good at, where your character is from, what languages they speak. I think I much prefer having control over who my character is. Because if I roll a random character, sure, I can think of the quirks and roleplay ideas to put into that character.
Right.
When I was playing 2nd edition, I rolled a cleric with unusually high dexterity. So I was an elf cleric with a bow, which was weird.
That's weird.
Clerics don't do bows most of the time. And it was awkward. I played it the best that I could, and it was a fun character to play, but I can't help but think that if I had a little bit more control over how that character was built, it would have been a much different and much better experience.
Right. You're actually having a bit of that now with Atlas.
Oh my god.
Oh, here we go. For our Feathered Hats campaign, we rolled 4d6, drop lowest, and then you can allocate those numbers.
Yeah, Atlas's scores are garbage right now. He's a level 7 character, and his highest score is a 14.
They were below average.
They were not great. But even with that, like, I've played his character as a unique kind of person.
Right.
But, like, choosing a class, for instance. That you are building that character from the ground up, but you're locking them into something.
Yeah.
And with a thing that has set tracks you can build into, I think that's the middle ground. So you can choose in Final Fantasy 1, for instance, do you want to be a black mage? Or do you want to be a white mage? Or do you want to be a fighter? Once you choose that, that is what you are.
Yeah, you picked your job, and then that was your set.
And I think that's how Dungeons & Dragons works as well. I'm still, like, on the fence as to what I had ought to do when Atlas hits 8th level. Because Bard 8 is garbage and empty. He gets nothing good. So what am I supposed to do with that? Do I break the tradition of him going Bard and try to go into something else? Or do I keep him pure Bard for the possibility of getting to level 19 at some point and getting Wish?
Would higher base stats or a point buy change your leveling path?
Most definitely. If I, for instance, had a high enough stat that I would think that I'd be good at a specific thing, as opposed to his main skill, which is bullshitting, then it would be a different experience. If I had high dexterity, he'd probably end up having been a sharpshooter. If I had high intelligence, he'd probably have ended up being like a really intense storyteller who also had better magic in general. And I would have been able to build that character in a different way.
So you point by it and Dex was your second stat. Maybe you would have dipped into a rogue or revised ranger, and that would have supplemented your attack ability.
I'm so glad that you chose revised ranger. Because
we talked about this.
Yeah, normal ranger is garbage. I might have dipped into rogue. I might have dipped into fighter to go with things like the weapon finesse feats.
Right.
Where I would have the ability to really duel somebody. If it was a one-on-one combat and Atlas was, say, Bard 5, Fighter 3 when he hits 8, he'd be a pretty good sword fighter.
Yeah.
As it stands now, Atlas gets stomped in every combat if he gets anywhere close to it. And that's because he was kind of pigeonholed into being a bad fighter.
But yeah, you've taken that and you've taken those random stats and you've been able to grow a character from that you can't survive toe-to-toe.
Right.
So you sit from the back and you've been more buffing the party and just really pissing off enemies from the sidelines.
Most definitely. That's his main thing.
Yeah.
His main skill is bullshitting.
Right.
And given the cards I was dealt, that was the best hand I could play. And I've been playing it. And I enjoy the hell out of it. Atlas is probably one of my favorite characters that I've played in Dungeons & Dragons. But I can't help but think.
Yeah. What could have been?
Yeah. But then again, it also lends itself to the simplicity of making a character.
Absolutely.
It's very easy to randomly roll up a character and be done with it. A 5-minute character generation means that you can get into the game significantly easier.
Right.
Where if you have to spend 4 hours building a character for the Star Wars RPG or something, that makes it such that your session 0 is twice as long, maybe, as your normal sessions. So it might just be that things that are overcomplicated are a bad idea.
Overcomplicated, you say?
What another segue!
What could possibly be overcomplicated?
Right? Well, let's talk about systems that have far too many rules for things. Like, for instance, Ars Magica. What a rulebook! If you don't use much magic in Ars Magica, if you don't use charms, for instance, then you can run that system down pat. But the second you start adding in the things like charms in that system, now suddenly there's another 85 pages of rules that you have to have memorized. If you don't have that stuff on the tip of your tongue all the time, and not just you, the player, but every other player and the GM, if you don't have those rules memorized, that game slogs to the speed of a can of soup. In Shadowrun, anything before the most recent edition of Shadowrun made Matrix combat and magic just ridiculous. When I was GMing that campaign, the most recent Shadowrun campaign that I was in, I loved that thing. It's my home system. I will go to Shadowrun when I want a good game. And know that that will be the perfect way to do it. Sure, I can play other systems. And I am super grateful that I have the opportunity to play in a really good 5th edition campaign right now. But if it was like, okay, our 5th edition campaign is over, what are we playing next? I will slam the Shadowrun rulebook down on the table and be like, there is no other choice. But it has to be the newest one because the old systems were far too complicated. If you didn't have a Matrix person on your team, you could get through 8 hours of content in 4 hours. But the second you add Matrix stuff in there, now your characters that are in the Matrix are acting 16 times faster than the people out of it. And it's so much more complicated.
So that's a good point, because this is something that I've seen in other systems too, where you have one character that is in this Matrix, and they are acting on a whole different battleground, a whole different rule set, a whole different set of consequences that have nothing to do with the rest of the party.
Yeah.
You have essentially split the party, and the rules told you to do so.
And that's the sort of like anything that, for instance, has like a different system for astral combat than normal combat. Or a system where you have to have different mechanics for the way different characters fight.
Yeah.
Like you use a different dice system if you're a magician or something like that. Any of those systems are soups complicated, and they slow things down, and they just make that part of the game really not fun.
Right.
I'll tell you what is fun, though. Systems that you can add onto existing games, such that they become significantly more fun and an objectively better experience.
And how would you do that?
Well, let's talk to our sponsor! Are your combats at your table boring? Do people fall asleep when it's not their turn? Have you realized that you can see through the veil of your combats? Have you realized that literally nothing in the combat round matters except for the person right before you because you can't plan dick without that? Well, have we got the system for you? Take it away, Mike!
Introducing Axe Tax, active combat for Dungeons & Dragons. This system is active, this system is deadly, this system keeps you on your toes, it keeps your players engaged in combat. Try it today, www.axe.tax. Pay the Axe Tax.
And we're back. Thanks, sponsor guys. Yes. Before we left on the break, we were talking about overcomplicated rule systems.
Right.
What is an example of a rule system that is overcomplicated but doesn't need to be? Something that if you took away some layers of it and just played it a slightly easier way would be a much better system.
Now, this has been fixed, but I'm going to say it anyway. Grappling in 3.5. I don't know it. I played 3.5 for close to a decade. I still don't know how to grapple someone in 3.5. I have no idea what to do. I don't know what dice to roll. I don't know what opposing dice to roll. I have no idea what happens.
Well, it's essentially an invisible extra stat on your character sheet.
Right.
You have to be able to be like, okay, you make opposed grapple checks. Well, what the hell is a grapple check? It's not a skill check.
Right.
Is it an attack roll? Well, kind of. Is it a strength check? Well, also kind of.
Yeah, but not really. Sometimes.
It's
okay, but you grappled someone.
Sure.
Now what?
When it's your turn, you have to make a grapple check opposed to them to maintain your grapple.
Right.
And if you have that, then you can push them around or something.
You can roll a pin, you can...
Sure, but then when it's their turn, they have to make an opposed grapple check in order to see if they can slip out of it or gain control of the grapple. And if they do that, then they can do all this extra other, oh my god, I have a headache.
Yes.
Grappling was ridiculous. It is far too overcomplicated. How do we take care of it in 5th edition now? It's a significantly easier setup.
Opposing athletics, you are grappled, you cannot do any semantic components, and that's it?
It's pretty much it.
That's pretty much it.
They've taken the opposed system, where you have to roll for every bloody thing that you do, and reduced it down to you are grappled now. Grappled is now a condition.
Yes.
As opposed to like a state of being.
As opposed to like 4 pages in the player's handbook.
God, right.
How about, I got one for you.
Yeah.
How do you fix dice bloat in late game Dungeons & Dragons?
Oh, Dungeons.
Now 3.5 was really bad, but let's even go back to 5th, where I'm going to cast... I am a barbarian. I roll 4 times, and with my magical axe, I'm swinging 4 times. I have status effects, I have other dice, and in total I rolled 42 dice my turn.
It's pretty insane. There are systems that require you to do that. Things like Shadowrun, White Wolf, where you have dice pools.
Right.
But in a system where dice pools are not the mechanic, and it's literally supposed to be d20 plus something.
Yeah.
But then when you're rolling for dice, it's like, okay, well now you have 8d6 damage, plus an extra this, plus an extra that. Right. I think if I were to fix it, I would start by, instead of saying like, okay, you're 3d6, when you level up now you're 4d6, instead let's raise the die rather than the number of dice. Let's look back at how monks used to work in 3.5. Their unarmed strikes started at d6, then went up to d8, then went up to d10, instead of being like d6, now 2d6, now 3d6. Granted, it is a significantly weirder curve of numbers, because the jump between a D12 and a D20 is insane.
Right, it's pretty insane, yeah.
But that jump could be mitigated to be like, alright, you're at D12. Now it's 2D12.
Right.
Now it's D20. Right. Now it's 2D20. And when you get up to that high, when you're doing 1D20 damage, then 2d20 isn't that big of a jump. 3d20 isn't that big of a jump because you're so far in, but you're only rolling 3 or 4 dice at that point. It does mess with the bell curve of doing damage a bit because you can still roll a 1 on your d20.
A 1 to a 20 is pretty big.
The variation of how much damage you can do and how much damage you do actually do is, I think, a big thing about how Dungeons & Dragons works.
Yes.
When you're doing it with things with dice pools, the average damage is a significantly more stable number than the average damage of a single die roll. It's much more stable. There's less statistical outliers for it. So if we are going to do something that would definitively fix having to roll that many dice in a system that you shouldn't be rolling that many dice, I think we've got 2 clear choices. There's either you start with a base, like, low threshold under which you cannot do less, and then just add more, at which point you know that every time you hit, regardless of whether it's with a tiny knife or a gigantic axe, you're going to be doing at least 12 damage plus another die. Or you use the dice step up and make it so that it's more likely to do your lower threshold. I suppose mathematically they're very similar.
Mathematically it's pretty same, and with the whole idea of being less dice, rolling dice is fun. It's part of tabletop gaming, but it gets draining.
It does.
Every single attack I gotta roll 6-7 different dice, I gotta add all these different numbers up. If I could roll a die, determine my damage from that, I think that would just smooth over the game. It would keep combat flowing. And as a player, I would more mechanically understand my character better than trying to add up a bunch of different numbers and not really getting gauge on my power.
Makes sense. So what about this then? Say that you go from a longsword, does 1d8 damage.
Right.
Then you go to a greatsword, does 2d6 damage.
Right.
What if you just roll 1d6 and multiply it by 2?
That's definitely a thing.
So if you've got a thing that does 8d6 damage, like Korei's fire stuff, you roll a d6 and multiply it by 8.
At that point, I would almost want a damage table. Where I roll a d6 and I have a table and I do a lookup.
At level 1, here is your damage table. At level 2, here is your damage table.
Yeah.
And now we're getting back into tables and tables and tables.
And tables and tables, yeah.
Which might be overcomplicated at one point, because you'll have to look through the table of where the table you need to look is. That's the problem that I have with D&D 3.5 when we're rolling for loot. First you roll on the loot table, which tells you whether or not you get specific pieces of things. Coins, pieces of art, pieces of
gems,
that sort of junk.
Trinkets,
And then sometimes you might get magic.
Right, it'll
if
say
you
magic
get magic, then you go to the magic item table to see whether it's a magic piece of armor, or a magic weapon, or a magic other. And if it's a magic weapon, then you roll on a table to see whether or not it's a generic magic weapon or a named magic weapon. And on and on and on and on. When I'm generating a random horde of loot for somebody because they did a cool thing that I wasn't planning for, and the generation of that loot takes 10 minutes, that is too long. Now, we have mitigated that by now with electronics.
Yes.
We have apps that do it for you.
There's so many apps that'll do it. In 5th edition, they did mitigate that quite a bit with the loot tables in the Dungeon Master's Guide, where you can roll a D100, and just from that, you're either going to get an item or graduate to the next table. And with more rolls, you can get to the higher table, and you can get an item fairly quickly. And they have other tables. If you want to add some quirks, you want to add some disadvantages to it, you can do that. And I found that fun, because I've done that with you guys only a few times.
I've been there.
With rolling, but recently, to speed that up, I've been doing loot cards.
Which I think is a fantastic idea. Like, all of this at the table have got these little notebooks that are filled with these loot cards, where if it's a thing that is something that we've gotten out of, a treasure chest or something like that, he hands us this hand of cards with all the cards face down, and we choose one of them out of it. So at that point, he knows what's in that hand of loot, and he's prepared for it. It means that there's no randomly generated thing that could possibly break the game later, because he's been able to prepare for all the things.
Right. And it's still giving you guys a chance to get a random piece of loot, because there's a good 20 cards in that deck.
Oh, definitely.
And most of those cards, I will say, more than half of them I have rolled on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And a few of them would have put some encounters in jeopardy had you gotten them early in the campaign.
Right.
But that has been a fun way to kind of take some existing mechanics and smooth them over.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think a lot of the smoothing out like that is the onus is on the game master at that point to do preparation beforehand. Mm-hmm. Anything that you have to randomly generate in a game takes up time, so if you can do it beforehand, great.
Right. Is there something that you just, as a game master, can't smooth out? Something that, no matter how many times you look at the rule, no matter how many times you look at a particular way to play, or maybe a class, what we can say, you just can't for the life of you smooth it out.
Boy, oh boy, have I been waiting to talk about this thing. Let's talk about the absolute just worst idea to have ever blemished the face of Dungeons and Dragons when we talk about psionics.
Oh boy.
Not just even the psionic class, but the idea,
just the idea
of psionics.
Yeah.
So in Power Rangers, in the later
Power
series,
Rangers.
Trust me on this.
Okay.
In the later series, you get, for instance, in Space Patrol Delta, the one where there's the ridiculous dog that is the weird animatronic thing, looks like something straight out of Five Nights at Freddy's, and it's the, commander of the squadron. Ridiculous. They are these kids who are part of, a space police force. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And one of them has the ability to walk through walls for some reason. Mm. And one of them has the ability to, read people's minds and auras for and apropos of nothing, they have these extra powers. And then they become the Power Rangers. So they get this cool class, the Power Ranger class.
Right.
That gives them these sweet abilities where they're better at fighting, they can take more damage, that sort of stuff. But they had this extra broken thing beforehand that is not related to any of the other things that their class does. Not related to their background at all. They just have it. Mm-hmm. That is psionics. Psionics are a quick way to break your game.
Very, very quick way.
No matter how much you prepare.
I think with the psionics, the biggest thing, I've never DM'd a psionic, but I've played with one. And the biggest problem I had with them was it didn't matter what I did or what the other party members did as a player, the psionic could do it. And most of the time, they could do it better.
Yeah, it's a definite easy way to steal the spotlight, especially if there's only one person in the party who has psionics.
That's the problem. Psionics is the thing, is if you were going to be a psionic at the table, everyone else at the table needs to be a psionic.
Yeah.
It's the only way you can do it.
Mm-hmm. That's the biggest problem with it, is it causes, starstruck syndrome, where your barbarian can, go into a rage and hit something really hard, but your psionic has an ability that allows them to hit something really hard too. Mm-hmm. And they're also a rogue or something. Mm-hmm. Or, you've got your wizard who can store spells in a ring or something like that. But a psionic can use their psi points to do the same thing. And they're also a ranger or whatever.
For those not up on psionics, I think they were only recently introduced to 5th edition.
And thank the stars that they weren't introduced before.
That would have been a point of contention had they been in the player's handbook.
God.
We're talking about characters that use mental abilities to will things into the world, whether that be abilities or even items. For example, you can have a scion if you need to use rope to propel down the side of a cliff. You can pull it out of your bag, or a scion could think of rope, and now they have rope in their hand.
Now there is a rope, yeah.
They are pretty much DM light.
They get to cheat as part of the rules.
Yes.
And if they're the only one that can do it, it's bad feels for the rest of the players.
Yes. The rest of the players they are at the mercy of the world around them, where scions can bend it. They are Neo.
And it's really lame, because, if you're watching The Matrix, you can see how, cool Trinity is. Yeah. You can see her do her sweet backflips or whatever.
Yeah.
Trinity gets shot.
Yep.
Neo doesn't.
Neo doesn't, and Neo can even remove the bullet from Trinity. That's a goddamn scion.
Yep.
And that's what it's like. You can be Morpheus, you can be Trinity, you can be the entire crew of the Nebuchadnezzar, being badasses, but you're garbage compared to Neo.
Yeah, you're not badass enough.
Yeah.
It's like the Z fighters in Dragon Ball Z. Krillin is kind of strong, Yamcha is maybe not so strong, but he's a decent fighter. Piccolo's pretty cool, he can cut a planet in half. Nobody cares, because you're not Goku.
Right. That's being in a party with a Scion.
Right. And, sometimes Goku is dead, but he comes back! That's a Scion.
Sure, that's a Scion.
Sometimes Goku's gonna get beat, but then he just doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
That's a Scion. It's bad. When you don't have the ability to enjoy what your character can do because they are made redundant, that's when...
That's the mechanics we're talking about, yeah.
That's when psionics are dumb.
Yeah.
So, that is a quick overview of some of the things that we don't like about specific systems and things that you kind of can't really fix out of those systems unless you just straight don't do it.
It's one of those things where you can put your foot down as the DM and the GM and agree and come to the agreement with your players too. Hey, these things, they're not going to float. Let's just cut them out now. Not going to bring them up. Okay, done. Moving on.
Mm-hmm. But if you don't do that and they come up too late, it's bad feels at the table. And
bad
that's
news
the
bears.
one thing that you really gotta try to avoid is bad feels at the table.
Mm-hmm.
So what are your bad feels at the table stories? You can get into contact with us and tell us those stories. On Twitter, we are at Tokyo Tabletop. You can hit us up on Facebook as well. That's facebook.com/Tokyo Tabletop. If you want to be a little bit more old-fashioned, then you can send us an email directly at tokyotabletop@gmail.com.
Wow, email is old-fashioned now.
It really is,
It really is.
But thank you very much for listening. I hope that you have had a good time with it. Go ahead and if you feel like doing us a good favor, you can give us a good review on iTunes or Stitcher or wherever else you found this podcast, so that we can maybe get a little bit more large of an audience.
Leave us a review. We'll give you a shout out. And we have some stuff to tease that's coming up soon. We have a super secret project we're working on.
Oh man, the super secret project that's coming out soon.
We actually just tested it earlier this night before we did this podcast. It's
quite good.
It's pretty good.
This one is for all of you guys who want to get involved.
Mm-hmm. And we're really looking forward to bring some chaos into our game.
Yeah,
I think is a good way to say it.
A hands-on approach to
more hands-on, yeah.
The stuff that happens at our table.
We're excited about that, so stay tuned on all our channels to get some more information about that.
Most definitely.
And thank you for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.
See you guys later.